Part 30. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Faye. Chapter 292. Chapter 292. Hello, Master. On the tarmac of a private estate in China, a group of people stood ready, led by a mean-looking man with white hair. Mo Zhang, the master of the house will be here soon, what should we do? A person next to him quietly approached him and asked, with a very worried tone. Li Ju has not been back for half a year. In the past 6 months, all the affairs of the Mo family have been handled by them, and they have also handled the property. I am afraid only they themselves know how much they have made. Furthermore, this time, they also secretly formed an alliance with other families and wanted to annex Organization J. Unexpectedly, Li Ju would come back just after the plan was implemented. Mo Sang stood there, patted the dust on his sleeves, and replied casually, "What can I do? Let's drink it cold." But if she knew what we were doing in private. The man felt guilty. After all, Li Ju's methods were very cunning, and they were simply not something old bones like them could withstand. She won't know, Mo Sang said with a sneer on his lips, having been away for half a year. You still hope that the Mo family will be of the same mind as her, ridiculous. Since she left the Mo family alone, don't blame him for taking action. A glimmer of light flashed in Mo Sang's pupils. Suddenly, the sound of a helicopter propeller piercing the air was heard not far away, and a black spot slowly approached from far away. The propeller rotated rapidly, creating a gust of air that lifted everyone's clothes. Everyone was almost blinded by the dust and could only squint as the helicopter landed slowly. The cabin door opened, and a pair of slender and straight legs stepped out. The short boots clicked crisply on the steps. Li Ju was dressed neatly in black. The hem of the windbreaker was blown up by the wind, revealing a thin waist. She held the cabin door with one hand, glanced at everyone present expressionlessly, and took off the sunglasses on her face. Everyone bowed in unison in an instant, and their voices echoed on the tarmac, "Hello, Master." Li Ju ignored them, stepped off the helicopter, and threw the sunglasses in his hand straight back. Bimwu, who was following Li Ju, reached out to catch the sunglasses, put them into his pocket, and followed Li Ju silently, like a bodyguard. In fact, her current identity is Li Ju's bodyguard, that is, Mo Lu, the bodyguard of the head of the Mo family. At this time, she had put on a human skin mask and disguised herself as another person. Even if Bai Yuxiu stood in front of her now, he might not be able to recognize her. Although not many people in continent know the female star Bimwu, it is always better to be cautious. Bimwu followed Li Ju and stopped with her in front of Mo Sang and the others. "Master Mo, long time no see." Li Ju looked at Mo Sang and said hello. Ma San had a flawless smile on his face, and his expression was very enthusiastic. "Master, you are back, we all miss you." Li Ju raised his eyebrows, "Really?" She looked at the others inquiringly and asked uncertainly, "You all miss me?" Everyone immediately agreed, "Yes. Of course." "Master, you are back." Looking at the hypocritical people in front of him, Bimwu sneered from the side and said, "Hey, I said, the master has been catching a flight for a few hours, why don't you let her rest quickly? What are you doing here?" The expressions of several people stiffened and they looked at Bimwu. At that moment, everyone was thinking, why hasn't the head of the house replaced this disgusting bodyguard? Bimwu has always appeared in the Mo family as Li Ju's bodyguard, and Li Ju's character set for her is that of a venomous person. Therefore, when she was in the Mo family, almost everyone at the top and bottom of the house was personally controlled by her. She used her words to teach a lesson to the point where she was hated by everyone. Most of the Mo family wanted to kill her, but unfortunately she was very skilled in martial arts and had been following Li Ju around, so there was no room for them to do anything. Mo Sang was the first to react and immediately smiled, "I'm really sorry, Master. It's my old fool who didn't make the arrangements properly. As soon as he finished speaking, before Li Ju could say anything, Bimweo sneered, I thought it was Mr. Mo who was deliberately trying to intimidate the head of the family. Mo Sang's face froze and he said, why, how could it be possible? I'll ask someone to prepare it right now. He waved his hand behind him and ordered people to prepare the room. Mo Sang glanced at Bimweo secretly, his eyes narrowed slightly, and there was a coldness in his eyes, but it was fleeting. Li Ju flew from the imperial capital to S continent and took a flight for several hours. Now she is so sleepy that she is extremely irritable and depressed. No one dares to get close to her. Ma Sang and the others sent her to the prepared room and left, saying they wanted to clean her up, but in fact they didn't know what the trouble was. Bimweo checked everything inside and outside the room, found several mini bugs and destroyed them all. I knew these old guys were evil. Bimweo couldn't help but sneer as he looked at the pile of bugging remains in front of him. She looked up at Li Ju, who was sitting on the sofa with his head propped up on his hands and eyes closed, and asked, Boss, it seems they have done a lot behind your back. Otherwise, why would you take such a big risk to monitor her every move? But that's just it, a little too childish. As if he guessed what she was thinking, Li Ju opened his eyes and glanced at the pile of debris. You think this is child's play? They think so too, and all they found are for us to see. These obvious surveillances were deliberately left for them to discover. There must be more hidden in the dark. What should we do? Li Ju said nonchalantly, it's okay, I turned on the shield. Bimweo made a sound and gave her a thumbs up for her foresight. Seeing that she was really sleepy, he said, Boss, please go get some sleep first. I'll watch over you outside. Li Ju pressed her eyebrows and felt that her head was about to explode. She said tiredly, okay. She stood up and walked into the bedroom, locked the door, took out a bottle of medicine from her luggage, poured out 2 pills, swallowed them, closed the lid and put them back. Ji Yunchu was right. She couldn't sit on the helicopter in her current condition. From the moment she got on the helicopter until now, her head has been buzzing, like hundreds of millions of mosquitoes flapping their wings in your ears. The key is that she has no sense of taste and is not sensitive to pain, but her hearing and vision are okay, which makes her feel dizzy now. Li Ju was lying on the bed, frowning, her dark eyelashes trembling slightly. For some reason, she couldn't help but think of Qi Jinkai's face. Aware of this, Li Ju raised a self-deprecating smile on her lips. Is this being hypocritical? Outside, Bimweo was guarding Li Ju's room attentively, not letting anyone get close. Although this was the territory of the Li family and they had many people of their own, most of the people in the manor were brought by Mo Sang and the others. People, even if they think about it, it's not safe. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 293. Chapter 293. Don't underestimate Emoju. At this time, in another room, Mo Sang and others gathered together in a solemn atmosphere. The head of the family came back suddenly. Did you hear something? Mo Yuanhu looked worried. His words were rejected as soon as he said them. Impossible, it's been less than a few hours since we caught the person, how could she receive the news so quickly? The man looked very determined and continued, besides, I did this myself, and no one else will know. He turned around and assured Mo Sang, who had never shown any expression, I promise there will be no problem. Even so, if she comes back at this time, she must be coming with bad intentions. He never believed in coincidences. Li Ju came back this time and caught them off guard. Before that, no one had received any information. This was the most noteworthy thing. Moun Rong frowned and raised the key to the problem, we had no prior knowledge of Moju's return. Her influence in the Mo family is much deeper than we thought. They are basically the people who have access to the core of the Mo family, but they are always ambiguous about Li Ju's sphere of influence in the Mo family. This is why they have been afraid of Li Ju in recent years, even though they want to dispose of her. After all, no one knows what she got from the previous head of the family. So these years, they have not dared to act rashly. Mo Sang, who had been silent, put down the string of sandalwood beads he was playing with, looked out the window with gleaming eyes, and coldly snorted, "Just right, I also want to see what she is capable of." Hearing his disdainful tone towards Li Ju, Mo Yuanhua frowned for a moment, disapproval flashed across his eyes. Mo Ju has always had a deep mind, otherwise he wouldn't have been evenly matched against us after fighting for so many years. You'd better don't underestimate her. Look down on her. Mo Sang sneered twice, "You misunderstood, I never dare to underestimate her. It's just that this time, I am fully confident that no matter how deep her thoughts are, she will still be vulnerable to absolute strength." His tone was meaningful, and his words seemed to be sure that Li Ju would lose, leaving the two of them confused. Mo Yuanhua and Mo Yuanrong looked at each other and saw confusion in each other's eyes. "What do you mean?" Mo Yuanrong couldn't help but ask. "I'm warning you, if you do anything bad to the Mo family, I will never agree to it," he said firmly. In fact, the reason why they attached themselves to Mo Sang and cooperated with him to deal with Li Ju was entirely because they did not want the Mo family's property to fall into the hands of a foreigner for no reason. I think back then, the old head of the Mo family was seriously ill and almost unable to survive. They were already preparing for the funeral and inheritance distribution. Unexpectedly, the old head suddenly brought back a young woman and claimed that she was his long-lost daughter, and handed her the Mo family's shares and all the Mo family's overt and covert properties. The handover was completed almost at lightning speed. They didn't even react, and the old family leader passed away. Before he died, in front of a group of people who had followed him for decades, he told them to obey the new head of the family, and everything would be based on her orders. But how is this possible? There are still many doubts about Li Ju's identity. Even if the old family owner took out a paternity test, it is still unconvincing. Her experiences in the past 10 years and how she recognized the Mo family are still a mystery. No one knows where she came from, as if she fell from the sky, but the old head of the Mo family trusted her very much and responded to her requests. He even changed his will just before his death and handed the Mo family to him. If they could predict the old patriarch's thoughts in advance, they might be able to stop him in time, but who made him actually make all preparations? Lawyers and notaries were present, and there was no flaw. It was as if he was specially paving the way for Li Ju. But why? Mo Yuanrong still can't figure out why the old head of the family handed over the huge Mo family to a little girl before he died. This is really chilling to people like them. He cannot accept that the Mo family is controlled by someone who is not sure whether he is a Mo family member or not. So even if Mo Sang and he have always been at odds, and he has always been dissatisfied with Mo Sang's behavior, he will never let the Mo family fall into Li Ju's hands. Mo Yuanrong's eyes flashed with a hint of gloom. "Let's leave first. Mo Ju will be suspicious if we stay too long. Mo Sang, I've warned you, pay more attention to Mo Ju, she must be well prepared this time." Mo Yuanrong stood up, narrowed his eyes, and reminded Mo Sang kindly again. The latter waved to him, looking indifferent. Mo Yuanrong sighed, opened the door and left. Mo Yuanhua followed him. Seeing that he was always downcast, he couldn't help but comfort him. "Brother, don't worry too much. Maybe you are overthinking." Mo Yuanrong shook his head, his eyes darkened, and he said in a serious tone, "No, I have a hunch that things may change in the Mo family, but..." He turned around and glanced at Mo Sang's room. He suddenly felt a little powerless and could only sigh and said, "I don't know if my original choice was wrong. After all, Mo Sang may be more harmful to the Mo family than Li Ju. But he has no regrets." The situation has reached this point, and he cannot regret it anymore. He can only move forward. After the two Moon Rong brothers left, Mo Sang was the only one left in the huge room, and it suddenly became extremely quiet. Suddenly, he stood up, walked somewhere, stretched out his hand to find a switch, and pressed it gently. The next moment, there was a heavy collision sound on the floor, and a secret passage appeared in front of him. Mo Sang dodged into the dark passage. It was extremely dark inside because it was underground, and the air was filled with a disgusting smell of dampness and mold. But his expression remained unchanged. He picked up the flashlight he had put aside and walked slowly down the steps. Gradually, in the darkness in the distance, the vague clanking sound of iron chains can be heard, and there is also the creeping sound of gnawing like insects and rats. Perhaps when he heard Mo Sang's footsteps, he was handcuffed and leaned against a pillar, his body was bound by several thick iron chains, and his whole body was almost covered with wounds of varying degrees. The man slowly raised his head and laboriously pulled the eyes opened a crack. His face was swollen to the point of being swollen, and dirty blood and unhealed hideous scars crisscrossed his face, making it impossible to tell what his expression was at this time. The chains on his body made a soft sound as he moved slightly, which was particularly clear in the closed and dark space. He opened his lips and squeezed out a word through his teeth. His eyes were as fierce as if he wanted to tear Mwasa's bones into his belly, but the voice he spat out was hoarse like a broken gong. Mo San. Mo Zhang looked at his embarrassed look, smiled contemptuously, and greeted him, "Good morning, Mr. Jigzi." End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 294. Chapter 294, Find the Head of the Mo Family. G11 raised her eyes and looked at him coldly. What exactly do you want to do? Mo Sang chuckled, you will know what we want to do soon, don't worry. G11 snorted coldly, his eyes full of sarcasm, you won't succeed. Ma San didn't care at all about his words and found them a bit ridiculous. Man, even if he becomes a prisoner, he will still speak harshly. Mr. Jigzi really trusts Organization J, but you have disappeared for a week and they have made no move. I think they have given up on you, Mo Sang said. G11 was not moved at all. Mo Sang was not in a hurry. Since he hid the person here, he would have plenty of time to spend it slowly with him. Jigzi is the core weapon developer of Organization J and has a lot of information in his hands. If he can be used for his own use, it will be even more powerful for him. Hence, after other families planned to capture G11, he tried every possible means to convince those people that they would feel comfortable leaving G11 in the Mo family, in order to have more opportunities to win over him. Mr. Jigzi, I hope you can seriously consider what I said before. I have always been sincere towards talents like you. Mo Sang had a perfect and pious smile on his face. Jigzi sneered and raised his hand. The cold, metallic handcuffs on his wrists made a crisp sound when they touched. Sincerity? Your sincerity is to inject me with anesthesia and then lock me up here. Mo Sang was not angry at the sarcasm in G11's words. He just smiled and said, as long as you are willing to do things for me, nothing will be a problem. G11 was silent for a moment, narrowed her eyes, and carefully looked at his expression in the darkness, and suddenly asked, Mr. Mo, do you want me to work for you, or for the Mo family? Mo Sang raised his eyebrows and replied matter-of-factly, isn't doing things for me the same as doing things for the Mo family? There is no difference between the two. Hearing his words, a glimmer of light flashed deep in G11's eyes. He wanted to use himself for his own purposes, rather than doing things for the Mo family. It seemed that the head of the Mo family didn't know about this. Although he usually concentrates on doing experiments in the research laboratory within the organization, he does not know everything about the outside world. The struggle for power between the head of the Mo family and several branches of the Mo family was known to almost the entire continent, and he had also heard about it. He has been staying in the Mo family's dungeon for several weeks since he was arrested on his last mission. He has a general understanding of the place through conversations with people who deliver food every day. Something must have happened in the Mo family today, which made Mo Sang's tone a little urgent when he persuaded him this time. Although he concealed it well, he still noticed something was wrong. There is no one else but the head of the Mo family who could make Mo Sang so anxious. Even though he has never met Emoju, since she and Mo Sang are not from the same place, as long as he can see her and explain the situation, he still has a good chance of contacting the boss. Almost instantly, countless thoughts flashed through G11's mind, and the plan in his mind took shape. He calmed down and warned himself not to be impatient. Mo Sang, an old fox, was very cunning. Before he could find a way to meet Emoju, absolutely cannot make him suspicious. Otherwise he will definitely move himself somewhere else. Thinking like this, G11 calmed down a lot and stopped paying attention to Mo Sang's words. He leaned against the wall behind and slowly closed his eyes. Seeing that he still looked indifferent, Mo Sang gritted his teeth and clenched his fists in anger. Finally, he glanced at G11 with a gloomy look and turned around to leave. Moun Rong was right. When Li Ju suddenly returned to Mo's house, she must be preparing to do something. If he didn't understand what she was going to do, he couldn't act rashly. Although it is very risky to lock G11 here, and many people in the Mo family know about this dungeon besides him, there is nothing that can be done. Li Ju is now in the Mo family, and there is no way he can secretly imprison G11 under her nose. To transport him away, we can only continue to keep him here. But if this continues, there will still be great risk exposure. If Li Ju knows what he has done. Mo Sang's eyes were sharp, so don't blame him for being ruthless. After Mo Sang left the dungeon, G11 opened his eyes suddenly. After confirming that he would not come back, he lowered his head and took out a piece of wire from his breast pocket, and easily unlocked the handcuffs. The metal handcuffs fell to the ground with a clang, and the chains on his body were also untied. Jigzi stood up, moved his wrists and ankles, and looked at the things on the ground with a mocking look. You still want to trap him with all this? That's ridiculous. The anesthetic on his body had been drained off as early as the second day after he came in. Do you really think he didn't notice that the food delivered every day was drugged? The reason why he did not leave was because he did not understand the specific situation of the Mo family. Even if he escaped from the dungeon, it would be of no use if he could not escape from the Mo family. Secondly, he also wants to know what the Mo Sang and other families want to do to their J organization. How about it? Li Ju was sitting on the sofa. Bimweo had just come back from the door and placed the document in his hand in front of her. Everything Mo Sang has done recently is here, which is very strange. Bimweo frowned. Li Ju reached out and flipped through it, quickly browsing through it. They are all everyday things, nothing strange at all. This is the biggest strange thing. How could Mo Sang be so content? Li Ju put the document back on the table and said with a smile, you think so, and so does he. Bimweo frowned, not understanding what she meant. What? You suspect that Mo Sang is doing something behind our back? He just wants us to think so, and then it will be logical for us to investigate where he has been and what he has done recently. Shouldn't it be? Li Ju said, indeed, I should, but I always feel that he is causing trouble in the Mo family. For example, when we come back this time, don't you think he is a little too attentive? Bimweo thought about it carefully and nodded. It was true. Since they came back, Mo Sang has been sending people over, and they are a bit over the top and completely inconsistent with his previous style. At first, she thought he was just trying to show off in front of others. Now it seems that he has evil intentions at all. In addition, after you cleared away the cameras in the room, I found a lot of hidden cameras nearby. These cameras cover all my activity routes. It was obvious that he wanted to spy on her. And I have to admit that if she hadn't used her powers, she might not have been able to pull out all the cameras. There must be something fishy about monitoring her actions in Mo's house with such great efforts. Li Ju tilted his head, tapped his thigh lightly with his fingers, narrowed his eyes and thought for a moment, then said, "Go to Uncle Mo and ask him if Mo Sang did anything unusual when I was away." Good. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 295. Chapter 295. I didn't find you on purpose. Hey, who do you think is locked up in the dungeon? On a remote path in Mo's garden, two women dressed as servants were holding some food in their hands and quietly discussing things they did not dare to say openly. I don't know, Mr. Mo looks so serious, he must be a very important person, right? I heard that the man was vicious and had blood on his hands. One of the thinner maids shrank. The other person said ah without any change in his expression, and said calmly, "So what? I think Mr. Mo is much scarier than the people in the dungeon. Only those who work under Mo Sang know what kind of devil Mo Sang is. Mo Sang didn't like others to know him too well, so he had to change his servants every half a month, and every time he changed servants, there would always be a few fewer servants serving him before, and the few servants would no longer be there. When he showed up at Mo's house, everyone knew where he went. In his eyes, human life is worthless at all, and people with low status like them, in Continent S, a place with imperfect laws and exclusive power of the aristocracy, do not have much chance of survival. They can only live one day longer. The two of them have been with Mo Sang for a week. As long as they are lucky enough, they can be transferred out to work elsewhere soon. Unexpectedly, he was suddenly sent by Mo Sang to deliver food to the people in the dungeon. The maid looked at the food in her hand, with a trace of worry in her eyes. Mo Sang's dungeon can be said to be an extremely confidential place. Normally, it is not the servants like them who know about it, but today he asked two of them to deliver it. I don't know if anything bad will happen. Hey, hey, hey. When the thin maid heard her words, her expression immediately changed. She quickly glanced around, and when she saw no one was around, she quickly whispered, "You are crazy. You dare to say that to Mr. Mo, there are cameras everywhere here. Aren't you afraid that he will hear us? We won't be able to walk around in a hurry." The maid was relatively calm. "Don't worry, he can't hear me." "Why?" "Because there are no cameras here." "How do you know?" The thin maid suddenly opened her eyes wide, her mouth half opened, and looked at her in surprise. How did she know there were no cameras nearby? The maid stopped, frowned, pursed her lips, and looked very confused. Seeing that she didn't speak, the thin maid touched her with her shoulder and said, "Speak." The maid looked at her with complicated eyes, and then said, "I'm telling you something, but don't think I'm crazy." "You say?" "I seem to have superpowers." The thin maid was silent for a moment, and then burst into laughter. "Do you have superpowers?" She glanced at the maid up and down, and said mockingly, "If you have superpowers, then I will still be an alien." The maid, who had long expected this outcome, dimmed her eyes for a moment, lowered her head and said nothing. Sure enough, no one believed her. Since a month ago, she has noticed subtle changes in herself. For example, her hearing is getting better and better. Many times, she can clearly hear other people's voices even through the door. Originally, she was very scared and troubled by this uncontrollable ability, but recently, her ability seems to be under her own control, and her hearing has become so strong that she can even hear the sound of electricity flowing. This is really incredible. She once thought she was hallucinating, but she wasn't. That was the fact. But when she told others about it, others either didn't believe her or laughed at her, just like the skinny maid. Over time, she didn't care anymore. No one would believe it anyway, so she just regarded it as a joke. Okay, stop laughing, bring the food in quickly, and then go back to Mr. Mo's place for business. The maid rolled her eyes at the thin maid, ignored her trembling smile, and walked straight past her towards the dungeon. Hey, wait for me. The thin maid quickly followed. The two followed Mo Sang's instructions, opened the dungeon's mechanism, and then cautiously entered through the entrance. No matter how joyfully she smiled just now, the skinny maid also looked extremely nervous now. Firstly, it's because it's too dark, and it can give people chills down their spines. Secondly, there are countless surveillance devices in this dungeon. If Mo Sang knew that they had done something wrong, the consequences would be waiting for them. Unthinkable. Thinking of this, the skinny maid couldn't help but turn paler, and her steps slowed down. She started walking in front and then gradually fell behind. Suddenly, the maid in front of her stopped, causing her heart to skip a beat. What's wrong?" the thin maid asked with trembling lips. The maid closed her eyes. Because the dungeon was too dark, it was impossible to see her expression clearly. She only heard her seem to take a deep breath and say, "It's okay, let's go." At the same time, out of sight, the maid's hands holding the tray tightened slightly. The two of them groped their way to the place in the darkness. However, when they saw the scene in front of them, the thin maid opened her eyes wide, took a breath, and screamed horribly, "The people here!" Before she could finish her words, there was a pop sound, and the tray in her hand hit the ground and shattered into pieces. Immediately afterwards, there was a sound like a heavy object falling to the ground. The maid's hand holding the tray couldn't help but tremble. She turned back tremblingly, and her fearful eyes met G11's cold eyes. He was still holding a piece of iron chain in his hand, and the thin maid was already lying unconscious at his feet, and she didn't know whether she was dead or not. "Don't worry, she's still alive," G11 said hoarsely, her voice thickened because she hadn't breathed fresh air for too long. The maid's pupils shrank, she took a few steps back suddenly, swallowed, and looked at him warily and fearfully, worried that he would do the same to her soon. However, G11 had no such intention. He threw the chain to the ground, making a loud clanking noise, which was particularly abrupt in the silent dungeon. The maid's heart trembled. "I won't touch you." Jigzi made a promise, but she had no intention of believing it. He smiled and didn't care. He just looked straight at her, looked at her carefully, and asked, "Did you just notice me?" Although it is a question, it has an affirmative tone. When she came in just now, she deliberately paused and let the thin maid stand closest to him, thus escaping the disaster. The only explanation for this is that she discovered herself a long time ago. G11's eyes darkened and he stared at her closely, feeling wary in his heart. No, I didn't mean to find you." Seeing his expression change, the maid's heart trembled, the tray in her hand fell to the ground, and she quickly waved her hand to explain. Jigzi narrowed his eyes, didn't he notice it on purpose? End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 296. Chapter 296. Take me to see your master. In the dark dungeon, the maid looked at G11 with horror in her eyes, her heart beating rapidly. "What do you mean it was not discovered on purpose, huh?" G11 asked with an upward pitch. I just heard your footsteps." The maid was startled by his tone and stammered back. "Heard?" G11 then looked at her seriously, but he couldn't tell that this person had a pretty good ear. "Do you know who I am?" The maid shook her head, "I don't know." "Then do you know why Mo Sang wanted to arrest me?" "Have no idea." Jigzi's eyes flashed, "How long have you been at Mo's house?" The maid replied in a low voice, half a month. She was bought back from the slums by the Mo family half a month ago. After Jigzi thought for a while, she felt that she was not familiar with the Mo family and needed a guide. Although this person seemed a little timid, she was quite smart, so she was the one. He suddenly stepped forward and approached her. Seeing his movement, the maid was startled and took a few steps back unconsciously. Jigzi raised the corners of his lips, looked at her with a half smile and said, "You have also seen this scene, don't you have anything to say?" The maid kept retreating until her back was pressed against the cold wall, which made her tremble, her legs became weak, and her voice began to tremble. Jigzi raised his eyebrows and continued, "Originally, I planned to get rid of both of you." Although his tone was very calm in the last four words, she still heard a murderous intention from it for no reason. The maid's heart was about to jump into her throat. She was not stupid. Of course she knew that the person who could be locked up in the dungeon by Mo Sang could not be a simple person. Looking at it now, it was impossible to escape from him. But she doesn't want to die. She still has her parents and sister to take care of. She must not die here. Almost instantly, the maid's mind was spinning rapidly, desperately thinking of any way to save herself. G11 saw that her face had turned pale, and he knew that his intimidation had achieved its effect. He was about to force her to lead him, but before he could speak, he heard her shout first. "Don't kill me. I can show you the way and let you escape." Jigzi's prepared words suddenly got stuck in his throat. He was stunned by what she suddenly blurted out. The surprise in his eyes flashed away, and G11's eyes suddenly became interested, and he began to look at her seriously, not missing her every expression. "Do you know what the consequences will be if you take me out?" The maid's eyes trembled, the color on her face faded, and she responded, "I know. But I want to live." She raised her head, and a gleam of light suddenly burst out from her eyes, a strong and stubborn light that belonged exclusively to survival. G11 raised his eyebrows, looking at her eyes, he suddenly remembered some of his earlier experiences, and subconsciously softened his heart. After he escaped, he would also make arrangements for her. Even if he had no intention of having this maid in the first place. "Okay, deal." Seeing that G11 finally agreed, the maid finally breathed a sigh of relief. However, before she could relax, her heart was in her throat again when her eyes touched the man lying on the ground. Then what should she do? The maid asked cautiously. "Get her out and find a place to hide and tie her up. But if Mr. Mo finds out, she will die according to Mo Sang's temperament. If he finds that there is no one in the dungeon, he will definitely trace it to the end. By then, the two of them who entered the dungeon at the end will definitely be killed by him. Never let go of mistakes." The maid bit her lip and lowered her eyes to the ground with a little pity. G11 sneered and said in a nonchalant tone, "What does her life and death have to do with me? He is not the Holy Father, and he has to take care of everyone's life." The maid was silent for a moment, lowered her eyes, then raised her head and said to him, "Well, let's go, it will be very dangerous if we stay any longer." G11 glanced at her in surprise and asked, "You don't want to save her?" He pointed to the thin maid on the ground. She said, "As you said, what does her life and death have to do with me? Bringing one more person with you means more danger. Neither you nor I know whether we can escape. She will only be a drag." G11 looked at her steadily, with a hint of admiration in his eyes, and suddenly raised the corners of his mouth and asked, "What's your name?" The maid was stunned for a moment, as if she didn't expect that he would ask such a question at this time. "Yinbing," she replied, "my name is Kui Yinbing." Her father is from the empire and can be considered half of the empire's blood. Her mother is illiterate and the name was given by her father. G11 chuckled and complained, "How come there is a girl with this name? But..." He paused, "I have been drinking ice for 10 years, And it's hard to cool my hot blood. You have a good name. Kui Yinbing paused and finally said, thank you. Okay, no more nonsense, let's go quickly. Zhigzi turned around and was about to leave, but Kui Yinbing stopped him. Wait a minute. He turned around and asked doubtfully, what's wrong? Kui Yinbing pursed his lips and said, there is surveillance at the entrance to the dungeon. Zhigzi smiled and said, not only the entrance to the dungeon, but also surveillance inside. Do you think that old guy Mo Sang would take it so lightly? Kui Yinbing frowned and his face changed slightly. Wasn't their conversation just heard by Mo Sang? No, she didn't hear any sound similar to electronic equipment when she came in just now. Could it be that her ability was malfunctioning? Seeing her frightened face, G11 said, I have already taken care of all those cameras. It is estimated that it will still be 10 minutes before Mo Sang realizes something is wrong, so can we talk while we are walking? Hearing this, Kui Yinbing immediately followed G11. Since time was tight, she directly led G11 down a path that only she knew. Where are we going? G11 asked. Kui Yinbing led him to a trot. As he ran, he pointed ahead and panted, I discovered this road by accident. There is a wall in front of it, and there is a sewer outside. You can get out from there. When she was bought into the Mo family, she often passed through the wall, secretly climbed out and returned to her home in the slum, and gave the money she earned to her parents, so she was very familiar with it. Is there no one there watching? As far as he knows, the guards of the Mo family have always been very strict. That place is dirty and smelly, no one will go there, don't worry. The two of them sped up and were about to reach the corner of the wall in front of them. However, G11 gradually stopped for some unknown reason. Kui Yinbing stopped when he noticed the footsteps following him. He also slowed down, looked back, and asked doubtfully, what's wrong? G11 stood there and frowned, not knowing what he was thinking. After a while, he raised his eyes to look at Kui Yinbing, his eyes were more serious than ever before, and said in a deep voice, Kui Yinbing, take me to see your master, Moju. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 298. Chapter 297 The reason for handing over the Mo family to Li Ju. Kui Yinbing couldn't believe what she heard. What? You're crazy. Mo Sang has probably discovered that he has escaped. Now he is looking for Moju. Maybe Mo Sang is next to Moju. Isn't this a trap for himself? Can't we wait until we get out to talk about anything, she said. G11 was very determined, no, take me to see your master now. His tone was unreasonable, and before Kui Yinbing could react, he turned around and walked back with her. Hey, what's going on, why do you have to go see the head of the family? Kui Yinbing was pulled by him and could hardly keep up with him, staggering. G11's face was very solemn, and he said in a deep voice, because I suddenly figured out something. When he was locked in the dungeon these days, he thought a lot, but his mind was still blocked like a mess. When he came out of the dungeon just now, he suddenly had a flash of inspiration and thought of something very important. What's the matter? Kui Yinbing asked subconsciously and curiously. G11 did not answer her, but looked at her with a serious look and said sternly, take me to see Moju quickly. It's too late. Oh okay, follow me. She was stunned by the yelling and quickly took G11 to Li Ju's residence. However, before I had walked a few steps, I heard the sound of messy footsteps coming from around me. Someone said, quick. Mr. Mo said, don't miss any place, search carefully for me. Seeing the group of people getting closer and closer, Kui Yinbing felt a thump in her heart and quickly turned back to look at G11. He noticed that you are not here anymore. But G11 was very calm and pulled her to the side corner. Due to the angle of view, he easily dodged it. After those people left, Kui Yinbing breathed a sigh of relief, but still had some lingering fears. No, Mo Sang has already discovered you. If you don't leave, you won't be able to leave. Don't look for the owner of the family. Leave quickly. Kui Yinbing didn't expect Mo Sang's people to be so quick. The situation was becoming increasingly unfavorable for them, and it was not suitable to take risks at all. G11 gave her a reassuring look and said comfortingly, "Don't worry, Mo Sang is not at Mo's house." His tone was not speculation but certainty, as if he knew where Mo Sang had gone. Kui Yinbing was stunned and asked blankly, "How do you know?" Zhigzi raised his lips and sneered, "That old fox is really courageous." He almost squeezed the last few words out from between his teeth. His eyes were so sad that Kui Yinbing's eyelids twitched. In the end, she couldn't defeat him, so she had to take him to find Li Ju. On the way, the two of them knocked out several people who found them. He was hiding from Mo Sang's people while looking for Li Ju. On the other side, Bai Muo was standing in the pavilion in the back garden of Mo's house. Opposite him sat an old man with a thin back and a stooped back. Neither of them spoke. Around the pavilion, ponds, rock eries, flowers and plants are integrated, which is pleasing to the eye. The breeze blows and feels relaxed and happy. "Uncle Mo, I didn't expect you to be able to create such a beautiful place in Mo's house." Bai Muo looked at the peaceful scenery around him and couldn't help but admired it. "Sixth Miss is ridiculous. I am a gardener myself. It's just my job to decorate the courtyard with flowers and plants." Bai Muo raised her lips and looked back at him, saying, "Uncle Mo, with your qualifications in the Mo family, how can you be just a gardener? You are too arrogant to belittle yourself." Uncle Mo raised his eyes, looked at her, and then suddenly laughed. "Stop complimenting me, old man, I know how much I have. Tell me, what does the master want from me?" Bai Muo is Li Ju's spokesperson in the Mo family. As long as she appears, it means that Li Ju must have something to convey. There is no doubt about this. In fact, he had already expected that Li Ju would look for him after returning to Mo's house, but he didn't expect it to be so soon. Bai Muo smiled, stopped beating around the bush, and went straight to the point. "The head of the family asked me to ask you, has Mo Sang been honest during her absence?" There was a brief silence in the atmosphere. Uncle Mo looked at her with dark eyes and asked, "What do you think?" Bai Muo still had a smile on his face, but his tone became much darker. "I don't think it's possible." Uncle Mo sighed, his eyes seeming to hate Mo Sang so much. "It's really impossible." "So what did he do?" "I don't know the details. His interactions with other family heads are secret, and I can't find out. But he suddenly brought someone back a few days ago and put him in a dungeon." Bai Muo raised his eyebrows. "Dungeon? The one in his convenience?" Mo Zhang's dungeon is no secret in the Mo family. When he was still following the old head of the Mo family, he was responsible for torture. He was responsible for handling spies sent by other families. For the sake of convenience, he directly asked someone to open up the underground of his house and build a dungeon. Unexpectedly, he is still using this dungeon. Who is that person? Since Mo Sang can be brought back in person, it is definitely not an easy role. Uncle Mo shook his head and said he didn't know. He monitors that person very strictly and doesn't let anyone get close to him even if he goes to deliver food to that person. He is his servant. Bai Muo narrowed his eyes and sneered. The more this happens, the more important that person is. And the people locked up in the dungeon must be related to the demon Mo Sang made during this period. Thinking of this, Bai Muo decided to go and see for himself. Before leaving, she did not forget to say thank you to Uncle Mo. "Thank you, Uncle Mo." Uncle Emo looked at her until he could no longer see her back, and then he looked away. He sighed heavily, with a long tone, as if he was about to be blown away by the wind. "What are you thankful for? This is all I can do now." After saying that, he stretched out his hands to rest on the stone pillar next to him, picked up the crutches placed at his feet, and slowly stood up straight. The trouser leg on the left side is empty. He used crutches and slowly moved himself to the wheelchair. He didn't know what he thought of, and his eyes suddenly became sore. Since the accident, he can only sit in a wheelchair every day, helplessly watching the Emo family decline day by day, watching the Emo family members dig a grave for the Emo family and themselves one by one. It's so confusing. It's so confusing. As a member of the Emo family, I was actually blinded by power, and fell to where I am today by mistake step by step. Even Liju, who is only in his early 20s and not from the Emo family, can see this. Why can't they, people who have lived for decades, not understand it? Since ancient times, big families must rise and fall. The generation from the Emo family to the old head of the Emo family has come to an end. The old head spent his whole life just to preserve the last bit of the Emo family's foundation, hoping that future generations can at least retain some of it. But the people of the Emo family didn't understand his painstaking efforts at all, and they just rushed forward blindly, which put the Emo family in the situation they are in today. Oh, master of the house! It must have been for this reason that you handed over the Emo family to Liju back then. Uncle Emo raised his eyes to the sky with a complicated expression. You want Liju to help you save the Emo family and clean up the garbage, right? End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Faye. Chapter 299. Chapter 298. You are so brave. Baimweo noticed something was wrong when he arrived near Emo Sang's residence. The security guards around him were obviously looking for something. These people were all Emo Sang's cronies. They were security guards in name, but in fact their armed skills were comparable to those of mercenaries. She didn't startle them, she just secretly observed them in the dark. She guessed that the imprisoned person might have escaped, but she still needed to be sure. When Baimweo saw someone coming towards her, she quickly climbed up a nearby tree, using the dense branches and leaves to cover her figure. Haven't found it yet? No. I don't have one here either. Several people wearing security uniforms and holding real guns met together. One of them, who seemed to have a higher position, cursed, "Damn it! Don't let me catch those two bastards. Brother, have they run out already?" Impossible, the Emo family manor is surrounded by high-voltage power grids and sensors. If someone runs out, an alarm will sound. And now the alarm outside has no response, which can only mean that people are still at Mo's house. Look, find it for me. I don't believe we can't find these two people even if we dig through the Emo family. Several people responded and scattered in all directions. After they left, Baimweo jumped lightly from the tree and landed steadily on the ground. While everyone was looking for someone, she took the opportunity to enter Emo Sang's study from the balcony on the second floor. According to Uncle Emo, the entrance to Emo Sang's dungeon is in his study. This old guy is very thief. The passages of the dungeon are set up in all directions. There is more than one entrance and exit, which may not necessarily be in any corner of the Emo family. She knew all this from the dungeon floor plan she found in the dark space on the wall of the study. As for why Emo Sang did such a stupid thing as drawing the floor plan of the dungeon and putting it in the study, the reason is most likely because he has a problem with his memory. Perhaps he was too confident in the security system of his study. Almost all the materials he usually read and memorized were placed openly on the table, allowing people to see them at a glance. From some detailed information in the study, it can be seen that Emo Sang's memory has declined severely, to the extent that he needs a notepad. The notepad is placed on the right side of his desk, a place that can be reached frequently. So Bimweo had to suspect that Mo Sang did all this because there was something wrong with his body. Draw out the floor plan of the dungeon because he might not be able to remember the way inside. Of course, everything is just speculation, there is no substantial evidence, and that is not what should be considered now, so Bimweo only had a little doubt in his heart and immediately entered the dungeon as marked on the plan. After confirming that the people inside had really escaped, Bimweo walked back and forth twice where G11 had been imprisoned, and then deduced his final escape route from the dungeon. It has to be said that Jixi's anti-tracking ability is very high. All the surveillance equipment along the way has been destroyed, and the human traces have been basically cleaned up. The conditions of all exits are similar, and it is impossible to tell which way he took. At this time, Bimweo's advantage as a superpower became apparent. She closed her eyes, concentrated her mind, and released every bit of her mental power to examine carefully. After a moment, she opened her eyes, a smile appeared on her lips, and she walked in one direction. In her eyes, the scene was very different now. The places where G11 walked were covered with a layer of light blue light by her spiritual power. The light blue light continued to wind into the distance. There is no end in sight, and some places even overlap. This is the trace of G11. Following her mental power, Bimweo walked the route that G11 had taken again, and finally stopped at the place where her mental power disappeared. Bimweo's face didn't look good. The layout of the surrounding scenery was so familiar to her because she came out of here an hour ago. This is Liju's residence. The reason why her mental power disappeared after being traced here is because Liju's mental power covered a radius of 1 kilometer. This was just caused by the mental power she inadvertently leaked. There is no way, Liju is not only one level higher than her mental tracking is invalid in her territory. However, what made Bimweo look grim was not because of this, but because G11 and his wife were near Liju's residence at the moment. Definitely. Her mental power disappeared after catching up here instead of returning to other places. This can only mean that G11 and the others did not come out after breaking in here. This made her very irritable. She didn't know who G11 was, whether he broke in here accidentally or for other reasons, but this was Liju's lunch break. If they disturbed her sleep, Bimweo felt that she would probably welcome to the affectionate training package of the dear boss from home. So Bimweo cursed in a low voice and quickly looked for the two fools who dared to disturb Liju's sleep without fear of death. Two idiots were squatting under the balcony of Liju's second-floor bedroom, discussing what to do next. Let's go up quickly. Jigzi raised his head and visually measured the distance. He felt that he was fine. He was about to jump up, but Kui Yinbing grabbed him by the corner of his clothes. What's wrong? Kui Yinbing looked up at the second-floor window, swallowed, and advised, I think we should not act rashly first. G11 was puzzled, why? Kui Yinbing couldn't tell, but when she got close to Liju's residence, she couldn't help but tremble in her heart. It was like an animal encountering a natural enemy. The powerless fear made her very palpitating. I think it's very dangerous inside, so it's better not to be reckless. G11 frowned, brushed her hand away, and said, don't worry too much. Didn't we check outside just now? There is no one in the bedroom. When they came in, they climbed up the tree outside. From there, they could easily see the situation on the second floor. There was no one inside, which meant that Liju was not there. If they go in now, they might be able to wait until Liju. But I really feel flustered. Kui Yinbing's expression became a little frightened, and she was extremely flustered. She didn't know why she was like this. In short, ever since she stepped in here, she felt like a heavy stone had been pressed on her heart, and she couldn't breathe. Then you stay here first and I'll go up by myself. Jigzi gave her instructions, and then jumped up. The height of the second floor was not too difficult for his height of about 1.8 meters. With his amazing jumping ability, he grabbed the railing of the balcony with both hands. Then he tried hard with both hands to climb onto the balcony, but the next second he heard an exclamation from below, "Be careful." As the sound of breaking through the air approached in his ears, in an instant reaction to the danger, Zhigzi turned to one side, subconsciously relaxed his hands, and fell from the top. He was able to steady himself and took a closer look. He found that it was a branch, and it had been broken off from the tree. The tail of the pointed branch was sinking deeply into the wall. If he hadn't dodged quickly just now, it would have been his back that was pierced. G11 was silent for a moment, then raised his head to look at the person coming. Baimwiu was dressed in black and the cold wind was blowing. He wore a metal mask on his face with a cold sheen. His voice was cold and gloomy. "You are so brave. How dare you break in here without permission?" End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 300. Chapter 299 is Jing Junyu in Organization J? Kui Yinbing was shocked by her words and quickly hid behind G11. Baimwiu's face behind the mask was extremely gloomy. He stepped closer and glanced at the second floor almost imperceptibly from the corner of his eye. After confirming that Li Ju had not noticed, he couldn't help but feel relieved. Fortunately, I almost came one step later. These two people were really enough. Do you know that Li Yan, who was asleep, did not dare to mess with? Even if you want to die, don't get her involved. Thinking of this, Baimwiu's voice became even colder. Who are you? Do you want to die if you break in here without permission? G11 looked at her calmly, and then replied, I want to see the head of the Mo family. Baimwiu raised his eyebrows and uttered a puzzled syllable, meet the head of the family. She raised her chin upwards, her meaning obvious, is this your attitude? Climb onto the balcony. I was not afraid to be solved by Li Yan before entering. Zhigzi's face froze and he looked embarrassed for a moment. He also knew that this was not polite, but he had no choice but to obey the emergency. Well, I'm sorry, but the situation is urgent, so I can only do this, he coughed lightly. But I am really in a hurry and want to see the head of the Mo family. Zhigzi looked anxious. Baimwiu frowned. This man was brought back by Mo Sang. His origin was unknown. The first thing he did when he ran out of the dungeon was not to escape from Mo's house but to find Li Ju. This purpose is somewhat intriguing. To be cautious, Baimwiu refused, the head of the family is not here. Zhigzi frowned fiercely, a flash of disappointment flashed across his eyes. Why was Mo Ju not there? If she is not here, is there anyone in the Mo family who can suppress Mo Sang? If not, then the matter is serious, because he already knows Mo Sang's plan, and what he has to do now is to stop him as soon as possible. Just when he was at a loss what to do, someone suddenly tugged at the corner of his clothes from behind. G11 tilted his head slightly, and Kui Yinbing whispered in his ear, the master of the house is inside. Her tone was full of certainty. G11 glanced at her with surprise, only to see her nodding towards him steadily. Although Kui Yinbing's voice was not loud, Baimwiu could still hear it clearly with her sharp ears. A trace of surprise flashed in her eyes. How does this person know that Li Ju is inside? Etc. Baimwiu's eyes suddenly fell on Kui Yinbing, and his eyes gradually narrowed. Just now she was hiding behind G11, but she didn't pay attention. Now that she took a closer look, there was something really wrong with this person. How come there are traces of mental fluctuations on her body? It stands to reason that both superpowers and ordinary people will have mental fluctuations, but the frequency of fluctuations of superpowers is significantly greater than that of ordinary people, which also allows them to sense things that ordinary people cannot. In her eyes, the fluctuations in Kui Yinbing's mental power were very weak by the standards of superpowers, but for ordinary people, they were a bit unusual. Baimwiu stared at Kui Yinbing closely and fell into deep thought for a short time. Seeing Baimwiu's silence, Zhigzi immediately understood that what Kui Yinbing said was most likely true, and explained anxiously, I really have something urgent to see Patriarch Mo. Bimwe raised her eyes and glanced at him lightly, and said calmly, sorry sir, you are a person who just escaped from the dungeon after being locked up by Mo Sang. Your identity is unknown. Do you think I can let you see the head of the family? I really don't mean any harm. Whether there is any malice or not is not just what you say. Bimwe narrowed his eyes, I told you that the head of the family is not here, please leave immediately. Otherwise, don't blame me for being rude. G11 didn't believe him no matter how he explained it, and the hand she showed just now made him understand that it was impossible for him to break in under her nose. Even if he really succeeded in breaking in, I might not be able to convince the head of the Mo family with just his mouth. Jigzi gritted his teeth, his expression angrily, his eyes filled with reluctance. He must not let Mo Sang succeed. So, he closed his eyes as if he had made up his mind, and regardless of how dangerous the situation he was in, he directly revealed his identity. I am G11 from Organization J. I have something very important, please let me see Patriarch Mo. Bimwe was stunned for a moment, Organization J? Before she could react and ask anything, she heard the slight sound of the door opening coming from the balcony on the second floor. The three people present raised their heads subconsciously. Liju was wearing slippers and silk pajamas. She looked at them with her eyes lowered and calmly said two words in a cold voice, come in. Since Liju had spoken, Bimwe naturally would not stop him anymore. After saying yes, he let G11 and Kui Yinbing in. As soon as he entered the door, he saw Liju sitting on the sofa with an expressionless face, his eyes filled with obvious anxiety and irritability that he had not woken up from. Bimwe paused. Boss, aren't you sleeping? Liju raised her eyelids and glanced at her coldly, you woke up when you threw the branch. Bimwe. Yes, she wants to finish. Knowing what would happen if she disturbed Liju while sleeping, Bimwe didn't dare to get in front of her anymore. He stood aside and exposed the two people behind him in front of Liju. Liju glanced at them indifferently. When his eyes fell on Kui Yinbing, he paused for a moment and then moved away without leaving a trace. You just said that you are from Organization J, Liju looked at G11 and slowly opened his lips and asked. G11 was still in shock that the head of the Mo family is such a young woman. He was stunned when he suddenly heard her ask, and then nodded quickly, yes, head of the Mo family, I am from the J organization G11, when I was on a mission before. Liju was not interested in hearing what happened to him and interrupted directly, where is Jing Junyu? Is he in J organization now? Jigzi's eyes suddenly widened. She actually knew her master? How come he has never heard of it? Master Mo, do you know our master? Liju glanced at him displeasedly, and the coldness in that glance made him shut up immediately, and replied obediently, my master was not here before I was captured, but I have been missing for so many days, so he must be back. If he disappears, the things he studies may also fall into the hands of others, and the master cannot ignore it. Liju raised his eyebrows, looked up at him for a few seconds, and said something unclear, you take yourself very seriously. Actually thought that Chi Jinkai would organize J to find him. But after thinking about it this way, she understood that he was on a business trip for a long time and it turned out that he was going to rescue his subordinates. Yesterday he confessed his love to her, but the next day he ran to save his subordinates. It's hard to tell that this person actually cares about his subordinates. Liju narrowed his eyes dangerously, feeling a little unhappy. G11 was confused by what she said and didn't understand what it meant, so she could only laugh awkwardly. The displeasure in Liju's eyes just flashed away. The next second she returned to her expressionless face and continued to ask, you just said you have something urgent to do with me. What's the matter? End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Faye. Chapter 301. Chapter 300. Tell the truth in front of me. Hearing Li Ju's question, G11 went straight to the point. Master Mo, please help me stop Mo sang. He took away RJ, my research results. Originally, he wanted to say RJ organization, but something suddenly occurred to him and he changed his mind. Li Ju raised his eyebrows. What research results? This, G11 was a little embarrassed. If you don't explain clearly, I won't help, Li Ju said. G11 gritted his teeth and said, sorry, it's related to the privacy of Organization J, so I can't tell you everything, but head of the Mo family, if you don't stop Mo sang as soon as possible, the Mo family and you will be in danger. Li Ju narrowed his eyes and chuckled, are you threatening me? G11 shook his head quickly, no, I'm serious. Mo sang took my things away when he caught me. If my calculation is correct, then he has probably joined up with people from other families and is ready to start. The reason why he didn't escape as soon as possible was because of this. It was too late to return to Organization J to stop Mo sang. If Li Ju could take action, it might still be possible. Seeing that Li Ju's expression remained unchanged, G11 finally dropped a piece of explosive news. Has Patriarch Mo heard of the association? Li Ju raised his eyes when he heard this. What Mo sang wants to do will definitely offend the association. If you know the meaning of the word association, you should understand that stopping Mo sang now is also saving the entire Mo family. If Mo sang succeeds, the association will definitely pursue the case, and the Mo family will be more or less implicated. His voice fell, and the air fell into a brief silence. Li Ju lowered her eyes and pondered, not knowing what she was thinking. Bimwe behind her frowned and glanced at G11 with unclear meaning. Good. After a long while, Li Ju finally agreed to G11's request, and the latter breathed a sigh of relief. She took out a wooden sign from her arms, raised her wrist, and threw it over. G11 caught it with sharp eyes and quick hands. He opened his palm and saw that it was still engraved with old patterns. Due to heavy wear and tear, the original appearance could no longer be seen clearly. Even so, G11 still knew that such a small wooden sign was equivalent to half a Mo family's military talisman. Hold this wooden sign, and the people of the Mo family will listen to you. Li Ju turned to Bimwe who was behind him and said, take him to Uncle Mo and ask Uncle Mo to name a few people to follow him. Yes. Bimwe responded and gave G11 a look, gesturing for him to follow. Kui Yinbing, who had been silent next to him, couldn't help but look happy when he saw this, and immediately wanted to follow G11. Unexpectedly, as soon as he turned around, Li Ju's faint voice came from behind, Miss, please stay. Kui Yinbing's expression froze, and he looked up at G11 helplessly. G11 immediately said, Master Mo, she. Li Ju knew what he wanted to say and interrupted him directly, I know she is your savior. Don't worry, I won't do anything to her. I just have something to ask her. Jigzi frowned. After all, Kui Yinbing is still a servant of the Mo family. As the head of the Mo family, Li Ju wants to ask her something. It's hard for him as an outsider to say anything. But at least she saved him, so he just left her alone. Good. Master Mo, I'll come and pick her up later. In this case, even if Li Ju wanted to do anything to her, there was nothing he could do. Li Ju chuckled lightly, except? She seems to be a servant of the Mo family. Do you want to do a good deed and redeem her? Most of the servants of the Mo family were bought from the slums, and everyone signed the contract is equivalent to a deed of betrayal. There are generally only two ways to leave the Mo family, die, or earn enough money to pay the contract penalty and gain freedom. G11 pursed her lips and said, she saved me, can't I help her? Li Ju raised her eyebrows and slowly raised the corners of her lips. Okay. I can't tell that this G11 is quite affectionate and righteous. Jigzi saw that Kui Yinbing was fine, so he left with Baimuyu. Suddenly, Li Ju and Kui Yinbing were the only two people left in the huge living room. The atmosphere was silent and the air seemed to be solidifying. Kui Yinbing stood in front of Li Ju tremblingly, with his head lowered and his expression unclear. The fingers of his two hands were nervously twisted together, revealing his inner uneasiness. She secretly raised her head and glanced at Li Ju, her heart beating incessantly. Although she has been at Mo's house for a while, she has never seen Li Ju before. Today is the first time. Although it was her first time, she had heard a lot of rumors, but most of them were descriptions of the head of the Mo family with fierce methods and ruthless personality. She also thought so in her heart. After all, she could match wits and courage with Mo Sang. How can we be so good if we have been evenly matched for so many years? Keep her here. Although I just said that for G11's sake, I won't do anything to her, but there is no second person here, so who can guarantee it? Kui Yinbing couldn't help but feel a deep uneasiness in his heart. As a servant of the Mo family, she helped G11 escape from the dungeon and broke into Li Ju's residence. According to the rules of the Mo family, she would not end well. Thinking of this, a layer of cold sweat broke out on her back. The atmosphere was silent for a long time. Kui Yinbing stood there without speaking, and Li Ju was not in a hurry. He calmly poured himself a glass of water, moistened his throat, and then said, "Why do you want to help G11? Kui Yinbing's nervous palms were sweating, and he had been waiting for Li Ju to speak out to seek blame. When he heard the sentence, he didn't react for a moment. Ah! She opened her mouth and said, "If I didn't help him, I would die, but I wanted to live, so I helped him." If she had been knocked unconscious by G11 in the dungeon, then when Mo Sang came back and found that she had escaped, he would definitely blame her for all the mistakes and seek his methods. Her end would most likely be death. Instead of doing this, it is better to do something for yourself. If G11 escapes, he will have a chance of survival. Li Ju looked at her eyes and couldn't help but become interested in her. This person really wanted to live, or in other words, she had an extreme desire to live. You want to live, for yourself. Kui Yinbing shook his head and nodded again. She raised her eyes slightly and said firmly, "I live for my family and myself." Li Ju's lips curled up slightly. "You are very interesting." Kui Yinbing couldn't figure out what she meant. Li Ju did not intend to continue this topic and asked, "Have you felt any difference in yourself recently?" Kui Yinbing was stunned. Suddenly, something about her hearing suddenly becoming very sensitive popped up in her mind. However, in front of Li Ju, she did not dare to say it. She just pursed her lips and remained silent. Li Ju could see her concerns at a glance and said, "You don't have to be afraid of anything. I think you should feel it. If I want to do something to you, you have no chance to resist." Kui Yinbing gritted his teeth. Although he didn't want to admit it, it was true. From the moment she entered the door, she felt an invisible oppression hanging over her body, filling her with fear but unable to resist. "So, you'd better tell the truth in front of me." End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 302. Chapter 301. Consider the number of people in the team. Kui Yinbing's pupils trembled slightly. He lowered his eyes and said in a trembling voice, My hearing is different from others." "How different is it?" Kui Yinbing thought for a moment and said after careful consideration, "I can hear footsteps dozens of meters away, and I can even hear the sound of blood flowing in the human body." Li Ju raised her eyebrows slightly and continued to ask, "When did it start?" "Probably last month." She can't remember clearly either. From that time on, she discovered that her hearing was different from ordinary people. When she told her friends, no one believed her. Instead, she was laughed at. Over time, she no longer took the initiative to mention her changes and kept the matter in her heart. However, her extraordinary hearing caused trouble. It was like a large loudspeaker was installed in her ears. Even the smallest sound reaching her was enough to make her head dizzy. Gradually, she fumbled little by little, and was finally able to control this ability. Originally, she thought that her special ability was higher than others, and she could use it as a life-saving charm if necessary in the future. But now, Kui Yinbing realized very clearly that the life-saving means she was so proud of might be vulnerable to Li Ju. Although she didn't understand Li Ju's strength at all, judging from the overwhelming fear she could feel just standing in front of her, Li Ju might be far more terrifying than she imagined. Last month, are you sure? Kui Yinbing nodded. Li Ju leaned back slightly, folded his hands behind his head, his eyes were half squinted, and his expression was thoughtful. Do you know how your special ability came about? Kui Yinbing shook his head. Have no idea. Li Ju looked at her quietly and suddenly laughed. You are really lucky. Kui Yinbing was stunned for a moment, his eyes filled with confusion. Huh? How is her luck? What does house master mean? Just one sentence left Kui Yinbing confused. However, Li Ju had no intention of giving her an answer, as if it was just an insignificant sigh. The atmosphere returned to silence again. Li Ju sat there without speaking, just sipping the water in the cup and moistening his slightly dry lips. Kui Yinbing now has a lot of questions in her heart, but she hesitates and does not have the courage to ask out loud. It wasn't until Baimwe pushed the door open that the silent atmosphere was broken. Li Ju put the cup aside, and the bottom of the cup hit the glass table, making a slight crisp sound. Master, we have already taken him to Uncle Mo, Baimwe said. Li Ju said and said, Lao Lu, is your bracelet here? Baimwe was stunned when he heard this, and then looked in the direction of Kui Yinbing as if he was aware of it. He looked around her confused face and nodded, I'm wearing it. Li Ju raised her chin in the direction of Kui Yinbing and said, test her. The corners of Baimwe's mouth raised slightly, and he immediately understood her intention. He raised his arm and rolled up his sleeves, revealing a white wrist with a black bracelet on it, and the same dark inscription as the previous ring was engraved on it. Pattern. She took off her bracelet, walked up to Kui Yinbing and said to her, raise your hand. Kui Yinbing didn't understand what she was going to do, but he obeyed her instructions and stretched out his hand. Baimwe grabbed her wrist with his left hand, and tapped the bracelet with his right hand. He only heard a very subtle beep sound, as if some mechanism was turned on. Baimwe placed the bracelet on her wrist and swept it back and forth a few times, then put down her hand and read out the data on it while staring at the bracelet. The differentiation rate is 86%, the purity is 60%, the power is too low, and the level cannot be measured. After reading, Baimwe was silent for a moment, then turned around and asked, how old are you this year? Kui Yinbing listened to the bunch of numbers that Baimwe read out, and his head became even more confused. Are these things really on that little bracelet? Or is this just something she made up? In addition, what are the differentiation rate, purity, and grade that she has never heard of before? At first hearing Baimwe's question, Kui Yinbing's expression stiffened slightly, and he finally reacted and replied, 10, 19 years old. After hearing this, Baimwe pondered for a moment and said, I'm a bit older, but my qualifications are really good. Li Ju smiled and said, since it's good, let's accept it. It just so happens that there hasn't been a new member in the team for a long time. Hearing her sudden words, Baimwe's eyes twitched and he asked in disbelief, are you serious? Baimwe's expression suddenly seemed a little hard to explain. Li Ju didn't see her expression and said directly to Kui Yinbing, from today on, you will stay with me, are you willing? Kui Yinbing's eyes lit up, and his eyes were immediately filled with joy. Yes. Being with Li Ju was something she couldn't even imagine. She helped G11 escape. Mo Sang would definitely not let her go when he came back, but now, Li Ju was actually willing to let her stay with him. Although she didn't understand what was going on, such a good opportunity fell in front of her, and she would be a fool not to seize it. Then you go and clean up, Li Ju said. Kui Yinbing nodded and went out happily. The door was closed, leaving only Bimweo and Li Ju. Bimweo couldn't help it any longer and asked, "Boss, have you thought about it? Do you really want to recruit her into the team? A superpower with a superpower level approaching 0? And she has just begun to awaken, and she is not fully awakened at all." Differentiation. Li Ju didn't care about this. Her strength was never what attracted people. You also saw the results of the test just now. She meets the team's standards. The corner of Bimweo's mouth twitched. Indeed, the 3 recruitment rules for their team are that the differentiation rate should not be less than 80%, the purity of mental power should not be less than 60%, and the age should not be more than 20 years old. Even if all the superpowers in the current association and the awakened ones selected every year are added together, there are only 20 who meet these standards. Hence, the number of members of their second team has always been at the bottom among all the supervision teams of the association from the time they were established until now. Bimweo was helpless. What did her boss think of this approach of not wanting anyone selected by the association, but relying on picking up all the new guys in the team? "Boss, you should seriously consider recruiting new people into the team for this year's selection. I heard that one team has recruited dozens of people, which is more than the total number of people we expected." Li Ju said casually, "It's just a waste of money." Bimweo was speechless and raised his forehead. "Boss, they are all the best seedlings carefully selected. How can the members of the first team be selected into the inspection team if they are not stupid but have insufficient qualifications? The people in the supervision team are not expensive. Our duty is to supervise the association and all superpowers, not to form a team to fight." Li Ju snorted coldly. "However, the number of people in our team is really pitiful." Bimweo was almost on the verge of collapse. The first team recruits people at the association selection, but their boss doesn't even pay attention to them. No one participates in the annual selection and friendly competitions. If this continues, the second team will really wither. End of this chapter.